when God decided to create the world, he said, "Let there be." He gave the world and all the forces within it a genuine autonomy, a genuine freedom. That is what it is to be created. To be created is to have a life of one's own, whether it's an amoeba, a mosquito, or whether it's you or me. And this autonomy comes to self-conscious freedom in us human beings. And of course, if we are genuinely free, we're free to make mistakes as well as to make good decisions. Mistakes cost lives, and certainly manifestly evil choices are ghastly and destructive. So, we cannot have free choice without the possibility of evil. Now, that's all, if you like, fairly obvious. I think a more sophisticated point is that we can't have rational beings like you and me without a certain stability and regularity in the environment. If I was suddenly to float up through the ceiling or drop through the floor, and we lived in an Alice in Wonderland world, so I didn't know whether the sun would rise tomorrow or not, we wouldn't be able to plan. We would therefore not be able to make rational decisions. Mind as we know it would not have evolved. And so it looks as though for there to be people like you and me and all human beings, there has to be a kind of impersonality about nature, everything doing its own thing.
And that will inevitably
mean that unfortunately it brings suffering and destruction. Of course, there's nothing wrong with, as we know, with volcanoes and earthquakes in themselves. They're simply the shifting of tectonic plates on a star which is cooled enough to allow life, but is not so cooled that it won't have life. If it was any hotter or any colder, there wouldn't be life. It's because there's a plate on it we can have life, but this sort of plate which covers over the molten stuff inside allows for...
So it's sort of the cost, if you like, of being embodied conscious creatures is at the cost of obviously the again, fragility of that life.
Now I think all this makes sense. In other words, there couldn't be people like you and me without. I can't see any other way of creating rational beings except for something like this. But it still raises the question, and this is the overpowering question at the heart of the book. Was God justified in creating the world? If this was the cost of it, and this is Ivan Karamazov's question. In the heart of the book, The Brothers Karamazov, where he tells horrific stories of the suffering of children, and then he turns to his brother Alyosha and says, "It's not God I don't believe in, Alyosha. It's just that I return him the ticket." Is this moral protest against God. Now, the implication of Ivan Karamazov's question is that it would have been better if God had not created the world in the first place, and that for me raises the question as to whether I am grateful that I'm alive. Are other people grateful that they're alive? Now, I can only answer that question for myself. I'm grateful that I'm alive. And I quote in the book a wonderful poem of W.H. Auden where he talks about raising his first fist in anger and despair and shouting against the sky. And then he keeps hearing the words, "Bless what there is for being." And I bless God for my being, but I can't answer that question for anybody else. Other people have to answer that for themselves.
This is Premier Christian Radio.
Where faith comes to life.